So we begin the 7th chapter, and to recap a little bit what we learned in the 6th, which is that the Rebbe deals with the lower level of impurity, which has no good at all. Now that Rebbe explained then that is the life force and vitality of everything which is impure, which Hashem says you're not allowed to engage with it, you're not allowed to consume it, you're not allowed to eating it. And for that matter, it encompasses and includes all the 365 mitzvahs, lo saseh. This 365 negative mitzvahs, meaning the mitzvahs which Hashem says not to do, and we said when Hashem says not to do, the impurity or the reason Hashem says not doing it is intrinsic with the object that Hashem says stay away from. If it's not a non-kosher meat, because the non-kosher meat is coming from, it's receiving its vitality and energy from the shalosh klipas hatmeis, from this lower level of impurity. Then, as we noted then, that there was the neutral, that we call it neutral just for the sole reason that it's something that you can go retract, or rather not retract, you can go regress or progress with it. You could take it and extract the good within it, or God forbid the other way around. And because this level of impurity, this klipa, this level of impurity has some good in it. And because it has some good in it, we have this is basically our mandate. We live in a world and we deal with this klipas noga, we deal with these ideas which receive their life force from this klipas nega, and we're told that our mission, our mandate is to extract the good and elevate, and ultimately elevate the entire world, and the world becomes a dwelling place for Hashem. So before even we go on, we'll try to again just point out this. So basically there's 3 ideas. One of it is kedusha, something which is completely sanctified, something which is holy on its own, and holy, godly, and anything which is, like we mentioned, the performance of a mitzvah or the mitzvah itself. It receives its energy from kedusha, from holiness. Then on the other extreme is this, what Hashem says: do not do not eat, do not consume, do not deal with, do not engage with. That receives its energy from the lower level of impurity, which has no good at all in it. And then there's something which is in the middle, intermediate level, which is the level of the klipas nega. Remember, this is important to remember the word klipas nega, which has a bit of good in it. Because it has a bit of good in it, everything which receives its energy from it could go 2 ways. One, it could be elevated to the right, to kedusha, or God forbid, it could descend and degrade to the lower level of impurity. So after Rabbi begins, what is the first thing which receives its life force and energy from this klipas nega? That is the animal soul which exists within man, which is the animal soul which we dealt with and we mentioned in the previous chapters, or mainly in the 6th chapter. Mainly in the 6th chapter. Now the Rebbe says this nefesh hachayunis habahamis, in other words, this animal soul which vitalizes the body of man, which is primarily invested in the blood of man, shemitzad klipa, which comes from klipa, because again it's animalistic, it's not particularly holy, or it's not holy. Hamlubeshes bedam, this nefesh hachayunis, this animal soul is invested in the blood of Adam, of man. That comes from, as is going to culminate this sentence, that comes from this klipas nega. So what do we do with our animal soul? We don't just shun it, we don't just say, well, you're no good. No, Hashem says that we have to love Hashem with our animal soul as well. In other words, we have to train it to be more godly, train it to align itself with a godly soul, with a godly purpose, and eventually transform the animal soul. How can we transform an animal soul? The answer, because the animal soul receives its life force and energy from this klipas nega, and because this klipas nega has good within it. So in our mandate again is to extract the good, elevate it, that it should be consumed and elevated and ascend to the level to the right, and as we say, we use right and left, to the right, to kedusha. So the animal soul also has the ability to be elevated and to be absorbed into kedusha. So it's very clear cut. Because the animal soul receives its life force and energy from this middle force, which is klipas nega, and klipas nega has good in it, so the animal soul also has good in it. And it's important to repeat, we mentioned a few times as well, this notion that if you look at the animal, there's nothing really bad or evil about the animal. It's not particularly godly, but it's not evil. Animals gore, but it's not its nature. It's not to do harm and to do bad. It's just whatever contributes to its comfort, that's what it does. Eats, sleeps, scratches itself on the fence, right? If you look at the life in the animal, whatever contributes to its comfort, that's what it does. So we have also within ourselves also that animal soul. And we don't have to look far to find it. We have within ourselves something which is also we like to do. The animal soul within us is the part within us which ultimately just likes to do things which contribute to our comfort. Eating, sleeping, or anything which it contributes to. And not necessarily with a purpose. So we have to take that and transform it, to bring purpose into all these actions, which initially they appear to be animalistic, and to train them, in other words, to bring purpose and tell that animalistic dimension within us, to train the animalistic dimension with us, yes, you're eating, but it has to be with a purpose, with a godly purpose. So then the eating itself is elevated. The food and the whole experience of eating is elevated to a godly purpose, because I'm eating in order to learn Torah, to have strength to daven, to have strength to do a good deed. So slowly but surely, with this, I'm training the animal soul. The animal soul itself is being elevated. It's being less animalistic, and slowly but surely more and more godly, till it can and should be ultimately transformed. Why? Because it comes from this klipa. He says similarly, v'nefashos behemoths, the souls of the physical animals, not only animal soul within man, but the physical animals. V'chayis, v'avis, v'dogim, behemoths, v'chayis, which is usually divided as behemoths is the classic animal, the goat, the sheep, then the chayis, which are, for example, the deer, because he's dealing with kosher chayis, things which are for example, the deer or anything which is kosher, and then v'aifes, the dugim, birds, fish, but tahayim, they're pure, which Hashem says umutarim ba'achila, they are permitted to eat. So they also, where do they receive their energy? Nothing. Again, everything exists because there's a flow of energy which enters into them, or is their whole makeup and their function. Where does the animal, the kosher animal, receive its energy from? It receives its energy from the klipas mega. Similarly, everything which is inanimate. Now here the Alter Rebbe doesn't have to say motar machil, because everything inanimate is mutar, is permitted. Water is an inanimate object. Where does water get its energy from? It gets its energy from this klipas nega, this neutral klipa. So it's not wholly on its own, but I could elevate it by making a bracha and utilizing the strength which I gain from this water, which quenched my thirst, in order to serve Hashem. And similarly, we call it semech, the world of plants, vegetation, amuter b'chila. Here that Rabbi has to say again, which is permitted to eat, which is again in contrast to what we learned last week. There's certain things again in the world of vegetation which is prohibited to eat. Or lakilay akerem, as we mentioned it in the end of last week's class, what Alter Rebbe mentions at the end of last week's chapter, that there's certain plants and in the world of vegetation that is prohibited. So Alter Rebbe adds muter b'chila, which is permitted to eat. Why is it permitted to eat? Because it's receiving its energy not from the left, in other words, the shols klipas maze, but from the klipas noga. And so too, has everything also, what the existence and the life and energy force of all the action and speech, utterances and machshav and thoughts and worldly matters, but worldly matters, not worldly matters which are associated with the prohibitions of Torah, but ein b'hem tzad isur, there is no side of prohibition. And let's use, for example, the action of eating. There's no prohibition on its own to eat, or similar dibur, speech, which are not prohibited to speak, machshava, thoughts which are neutral, they're not prohibited to think. So leisherish, there's no source. V'le'anaf, there's no branch. Mishal samitzas leises from the 365 mitzvahs. Losa said the negative mitzvahs. In other words, there's nothing prohibited about them. V'anfeihen. And the 365 mitzvahs and their branches, the Raisa, the Rabbanan, may be prohibited, Torah prohibitions, and may be rabbinic prohibitions. So what's the problem with them? What is the problem with these actions, thought, speech, and actions? The only problem of them is, or why aren't they godly if they're not associated with the 365 mitzvahs, say the negative mitzvahs? In other words, this is thought, speech, or action which Hashem did not say do not think or do not speak or do not do. What's the problem with them? Why aren't they holy? For one reason, because they are not performed for a godly purpose's sake. That's what keeps them in the middle territory, in this neutral territory. To say they're prohibited, to say that they should be associated with the lower level, why so? They're not they're not a thought, speech, and action what Hashem distinctively said not to do. Because if they were, like we learned in the end of the last week's chapter, they would be clearly receiving their energy from the Shalosh Klipsat Meis, from the lower level of impurity. And they are not, and on the other hand, they're not holy because there's nothing particularly holy. They're not words of Torah, they're not thoughts of Torah, they're not actions of mitzvahs. They're neutral ground. So what makes them neutral? That on their own they are permitted. So why aren't they holy? Because there's no godly purpose. It's l'shein l'shem shamayim. It's not for a godly sake. It's not for a godly sake, not for a godly purpose. So they're neutral ground. Where do they get their energy from? They get this energy of this performance, right? We mentioned last week, it's important to know every thought, what a person thinks. That doesn't happen on its own. There's energy in a thought. Agree? It's very clear. When there's thought, when you think about something, there's a certain energy which is flowing into that brain which is thinking. There's energy in speech, needless to say, needless to explain. There's energy in speech. There's energy in action, also needless to say. There's energy. If I'm able to do something, move a table from here to there, there's an energy which is allowing this to happen. Where is this energy coming from? This energy is coming from Klipas Noga, that neutral Klipa. Because it's not, again, you can't call it holy, but you can't call it unholy, because there's nothing with this thought, speech, and action which is associated in a line with the Shalosh Klipsat Meis. Rebbe as afilu tzerech haguf v'kiyumei, even it's the necessity of the body, and even it's the existence of the body. In other words, it maintains the existence of the body, and more so, it's the life force of the body, which means we know that the body needs to be sustained. A body needs to eat. A body needs to sleep. A body needs to drink in order to exist and to live and to function. So apparently, who created the body? God created the body. And God wants this body to exist and does not to expire. So when I'm sustaining the body, why shouldn't that itself be, or put that thought, speech, and action onto the holy conveyor belt, as we used the analogy last week? Why does it remain klipas nega? The answer is because I'm not focusing, I'm not saying that I'm vitalizing this body or I'm giving the existence and energy to this body because God wants. I just feel I have a body that says everything by nature wants to live and wants to exist. That's why I'm feeding my body. I don't put in front of my actions or thought, speech, and action. I don't put the base. I don't make the basis of it. It's because God wants the body to be healthy. I don't want to put the basis on the basis of this thought, speech, and action because God told us in a verse in the Torah to sustain your body, bring light, be careful, guard your body. No, I just do it because that's the natural me to sustain something which I again is my body, and I have this natural inherent in desire to sustain this body. So I don't have this godly purpose, which is guiding this thought, speech, and action. Therefore, it remains neutral territory. As opposed to the Alter Rebbe is going to explain, if I do guard my body because God told me so, or if you break it down, I eat that meal because I want to have the strength to learn Torah subsequently, or I drink that in order to pray with kavanah, with appropriate intention, then the action is the same. I'm feeding my body, I'm sustaining, I'm bringing existence to my body, but then that action has already a godly purpose. That takes the energy, or that action which has a godly purpose and energy, ultimately is brought onto or flipped onto the right, as we use that conveyor belt. In other words, right then, it's shifted. The energy which is coming into that action, even to that eating or sleeping or drinking, is coming directly from Kedusha, from holiness, from the holy dimension, from the holy side, from the God. It's a direct link to God and godliness, sanctity, and holiness. So here the Alter Rebbe is saying, before the Alter Rebbe introduces the purpose or the way it ought to be, in other words, to take that in, to take this thought and speech and action and focus with them, in other words, they should be guided by a godly purpose. The Alter Rebbe is speaking about solely about this thought, speech, and action, which it's completely neutral again because it's not prohibited. In the same token, I don't have any godly purpose and focus. In order to serve Hashem with my body. So where does it come from? So he says, just like we said, the animal soul. It's not bad, it's not unholy, or it doesn't receive its energy from the Shalosh Klipas Atmeis, in other words, the side of complete unholiness, pure unholiness. In the same token, prior to my transforming and refining my animal soul, it's certainly not receiving energy from Kedusha, from holiness. It's receiving its energy from the intermediate energy and force, which is Klipas Nega. The same, so if it's similar to the Nefesh Bahamis, that thought, or that action, Dibur, Machshavas Elo, that speech, those utterances, or Machshavas Elo, or those thoughts, also, they're not worse than Nefesh Bahamis Ba'atzma, from the animal soul itself. If you remember, we spoke about the animal soul. This is the garments of the animal soul, but the animal soul is made up from the intellectual dimension. It's Chachma Bina Das, as well as its character, which is the main makeup of the animal soul. Its character, the Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, Malchus, which again it has the 7 characters and attributes, which are negative, haughtiness, love to things which are trivial or unholy, fear from things which are not important, anger, overly indulging in worldly matters without any purpose. These are characters which are the combination of the animal soul itself, the thought, speech, and action, as we elaborated on this in the 6th chapter. These are the garments of the animal soul. So these garments of the animal soul are not different than the animal soul itself. Just like the animal soul itself receives its energy from Klipas Noga, from this intermediate force. Similarly, the thought, speech, and action. If there's no godly purpose, it's not bad. But on the other hand, there's nothing godly about it. So hence they receive their energy similar to the animal soul itself. They receive their energy from the Nefesh Chayunas from the Klipas Negva, Koil Kashala Koil. All of them, in other words, the animal soul itself and its thought, speech, and action. Nishpa v'nimshach. They draw their energy is drawn from from this second level, which we call it this neutral level, which in Klipa Sitrach, in other words, in is a force of impurity, which is called Klipa Revis, which is called the 4th. Now the 4th, because if you remember, the lower level is called Shalosh Klipat Atmiyah. They're called the 3 Klipas Atmiyah. So this is called the 4th. Hanikra Klipas Nega. It's called Klipas Nega. Nega means, literal meaning of Nega means light. It means there is a bit of light in that Klipa. As the Alter Rebbe is going to explain, Shebaylam Hazeh, which exists within this world. Hanikra Oylam Asiyah, which this world is called the world of action, the world of Asiyah. And the makeup of this world is Rubai Kikuleira, the majority, close to the entire energy of this world is evil, but there's a little nega, there's a little light which is switched on, which exists within this energy, which vitalizes this physical world, which the majority of it is truly evil. And Kikuli, almost all of it. But just a bit of good is mixed in, is mingled in this energy of no good. There's a bit of good. So if there's a bit of good, I got to find the good, extract it, expand on it, and broaden it. And that light which exists within that klipas nega, even it ultimately could illuminate the whole entire force of klipas nega, because light has a very, very, very strong force in comparison to darkness, meaning that it's not an equal battle when you have a tiny bit of light. If you walk into a room, it's pitch dark and you're looking for your watch. Pitch dark, 100% dark. How much light do you have to put on in order to get rid of the darkness? Now, if you want it to be bright, you got to put on a lot of light. But to break that darkness, tiny little fire. A tiny little fire will break the darkness. And if you stay a few minutes, you'll probably find that watch which you're looking for. And someone's going to say, how so? Let's take a measuring tape. Or let's take something which is going to see the volume. How much darkness? And when you came in, it was 100%. How big is that little fire? It's tiny. So everything around the fire was dark. You opened up, you struck a little match. So if you look at it in size, in volume, the darkness is way greater than a little bit of light. But look what that little bit of light did. It chased away the thickness of the darkness at once. Because light it is not measured then with a measuring stick and say, oh, this is the majority and all of it is dark. No, that little bit of light, as long as there's a little bit of light in there, you have the ability to expand that light. Look, oh, now it's light. Let's bring more light, because you're in charge. When there is a little light, you already have the dominance over the darkness which you're fighting. So that's what Alter Rebbe says. On one hand, it says it's a world with his klipas urubi kikulira. The majority, the significant majority, it says kikuli, almost all of it is evil. But because you have ma'at teiv mu'urav b'seichel, a little bit good, and a little bit light, which is mingled within it, we have the ability, and again, this becomes our mandate, to extract it, to find it, seek it, find it, extract it, expand on it, and eventually it should take over the whole klipas nega, that energy and force, and transform it, that it should become completely light. And starting with my nefesh bahamis, or starting from these thought, speech, and action, till I did it with a godly purpose, it's associated with this klipas nega, which majority of it is dark. Something which has no godly purpose, it is by definition dark. Because we came down to this world for a purpose to spread, to reveal the godly reality which exists within this world, within ourselves. And if we're not doing that, and there's no purpose to life, there's no godly purpose to life, it's certainly dark. And if it's a thought which doesn't have a godly purpose, or any word which is said, speech, or action which has no godly purpose, so it's certainly, by definition, it's dark. But if I take that, and I know that with this action, or let's use the example of eating, I'm going to eat, and I'm going to make a bracha, and I'm going to use the energy of my meal in order to learn Torah right after that meal. Then the meal itself, which before I brought in a godly purpose, which is completely dark, now the meal is becoming kadosh, became completely holy, just like the Gemara or any part of Torah which I'm going to learn subsequently. Why? Because right now what I did was I put on a light within that meal. Before I brought in this godly purpose, so the meal itself, because it didn't have anything godly to it, and God forbid something which doesn't have any godly purpose to it, is completely dark. Again, by definition, because the truth of everything is Einaid Milvad. There's nothing else but God, and God should be manifest in every part of reality. And when I do something, I engage in a certain action which does not have any godly purpose, by definition, it's so dark. But because the food is kosher, as we said before, it's not connected to any of the 365 negative aveiros, negative mitzvahs. So in other words, it's not intrinsically impure. The food is kosher. So it has the ability to be transformed. And I take that ungodly action, and I find the light within it. And what is the light within it? The fact that it is kosher, and I have the ability to bring a godly purpose into that action, and that's in this case into this meal, and I do so, I make a bracha. So when I'm making a bracha, I'm extracting the light, I'm expanding on that light, and I have a godly purpose in that meal. And after that meal, I follow through with the godly purpose. I open up a sefer and a piece of Torah, and I learn, or I use the energy to do a good deed, or to do a mitzvah. So then what I did was I eradicated all the darkness which exists with that meal that I ate prior, which existed prior to me making the bracha or eating it for a godly purpose. As it remained ungodly, I opened the light and I expanded the light, and I chased away all the darkness which exists in the exists with the energy which would be flowing into that meal. And now the energy which is flowing to that meal is this exact energy which is flowing into the mitzvah. And the mitzvah itself, by definition, is holy. The performance of a mitzvah is certainly, the energy which comes into the performance of the mitzvah is certainly coming from one place only, from the tzad HaKdusha, from the side of holiness. So the same energy which is coming into the mitzvah is coming right now into the meal. Why? Because I brought purpose into the meal. The meal was transformed. So when you're dealing with the actual performance of a mitzvah, the performance of a mitzvah is never dark, because it's a mitzvah. It's something which says in the Torah. It's intrinsically holy. The meal itself was not intrinsically holy. It wasn't unholy, but it's not holy. So if it's not holy, if it's unholy, it's dark. There's no godly purpose, it's dark. What I did, because it's kosher, so I found the light which exists within it, and I expound it, and I expand on it, I broaden it, and I chase away the darkness which exists in this ungodly purpose which existed prior to me bringing in this godly purpose. I got rid of it. Now it's completely shifted and it's receiving its energy from Kedusha. And if it's my meal, if it's my sleep, everything with a person, that's why the Rambam, famous Rambam, when he says a person serves God when he learns Torah, when he does mitzvahs. And the same person, when he lives a Jewish lifestyle, in other words, if his priorities, or he understands, he's focused on his mandate and his mission in his life to bring godliness in every part of his life, again, starting from Torah mitzvahs, and in other words, learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, but because he has to have, he'd be healthy in order to learn Torah. He has to have a clear mind to learn Torah. So he has to sleep and he has to eat, and whatever he engages in worldly affairs, because everything is for a godly purpose. The Rambam says that 24 hours of the entire 24 hours is classified as avodas Hashem, as serving God, which this Rambam is again synonymous with what Alter Rebbe is saying over here. We'll just read another few lines. Now, Alter Rebbe continues, says it has so much energy. If we learned in the first chapter, it says that even the good characters, which are the makeup of a Jew, which the Gemara says that the makeup of a Jew, there's there's 3 signs in this nation. One, the Rachmanim, Geimel Chasadim, and Baishanim. The Jew has, again, the siman, the sign of the Yid, the Gemara says, is that he is a Baishon. In other words, literally means shameful, but he's reserved. He's a reserved person. He's a compassionate person. This is another sign of the Jew, is compassionate. And then the other sign is Geimel Chesed. By nature, he likes to do kindness. And this, Alter Rebbe says, these good characters also come from the animal soul, which you see that that there is a strong light. Maybe small, minute, but it's still a powerful light. It has it has some strength and potency that it ultimately is the reason for, or is the energy of or this is where the good characters of the Jew, again associated with this, these 3 simanim, the 3 signs of the Jew, which again these are the 3 positive characters, also come from this animal soul. So you see the strength of this small light. It's very small, but the good characters, which is the makeup of the Jew, also comes from it. Vihi, and this energy is memutzaz ben shalosh kudzat meis legamri ubein bchinas madreg zakdusha. It's an intermediate force which stands in between, on the left. Again, we have the left and the right between the shalosh kudzat meis is the lower level of impurity, which has no good at all, ubein bchinas madreg zakdusha, and to the right the level of sanctity and holiness and sanctity. Vilchein, and therefore pa'amim, and this is again we use the expression neutral. Excuse me, we use the expression neutral because if you look at the car, the gear neutral, it's not there. It's not something something on its own. It's something that you could. The cars, again, we use this example as these vehicles. They put the gear of neutral not for the sake of neutral, in order this is the place where you can do something to go front, or you can do something to go backwards. Similarly, we call this neutral because it is a neutral force, but not to remain with its neutrality, but in order to utilize it or to use it in a way that to go frontwards, because it can't go backwards, like Alter Rebbe is going to explain. And Alter Rebbe first starts naturally with a positive, that it could be used and utilized to go ahead and to go frontwards. How? Okay, Alter Rebbe brings this from he starts. At times it regresses, meaning that it is consumed in the shalosh kudzat meis in the lower level, the level which there is no purity. Like it says in the Eitz Chaim, the 49th portal, in the beginning of the 4th chapter, in the name of the Zayir. It's absorbed and ascends into the levels of complete sanctity. The Alter Rebbe explains us how it exactly works. We just mentioned this orally, but let's see in the text. When the good which exists mingled within it is nizbar, which means it's dealt with, it's extracted from the evil V'goyver v'oila, and it's strengthened. V'oila, in a sense, v'nichlu b'kedusha, and it's absorbed in holiness. Then the action itself, or the speech, or the thought is as well absorbed, and it becomes part of the holy and sanctified experience. And he gives a mashal, as an example, he eats fat meat of an ox, or spiced wine. Well, that sounds like a very physical action. A good steak, a good fat piece of meat. So that action, prior to bringing a godly purpose, it's not particularly unholy, or on its own it could fall back to the level of holiness, but because it's kosher piece of meat, so it comes, the energy of this piece of meat comes from this intermediate level force, which is klipas nega. So now I'm put into the center of this field. I'm put into the center of this challenge, and I say, look, you have something. What are you going to do with it? So the Rebbe says, if I take this fat piece of meat, or I drink the spicy wine, to broaden my mind for God and for His Torah, because a person has to understand the Perek Tanya, or anything he learns, he has to have a clear mind. If he's hungry, it's hard for him to think. And more so, it says even that a good piece of meat contributes to the thought process, to the understanding, to the intellectual process. Understanding something is a good fat piece of meat contributes to that. Where do we see? The Gemara says an interesting story, that there was once a Tanya, he says, Chamra v'reicha pikhin, and he said, I think the story was a Rav. In any case, there was a story in the Gemara that somebody came, they dealt with a certain subject one day, and the next day he came and he brought so much more clarity to that same subject. So they said, you dealt with it yesterday, you're the same person, the same brain. He says, no, but last night I ate a good meal of fat meat, and therefore this morning I understand the concept so much better. So what do you see over here? That the fat meat contributed to what? To his understanding a piece of Torah. So and that's the purpose why he ate it. He didn't just eat it just to indulge in a good piece of meat. He ate it for that purpose. And the same thing over here. When you eat even fat piece of meat, it's delicious, it's good, but you got to be honest with yourself, though, right? Someone could eat it just, he just falls into that that experience, and then he's like, the last piece of meat is coming to his mouth, and he's so guilt-filled. So that's probably for the learning that piece of Gemara. I'm going to learn in my Daf Yomi the next day. I mean, that's. Dishonesty in Avodas Hashem doesn't work. It's not even to be negated. It's not even to be matched. You're talking about, because the whole makeup of Avodas, you're serving God. And there's no fooling God. God is God. So honesty is part and parcel of serving God. A person sometimes has to work as an honesty and his integrity within his service to God. But by definition, serving God goes together with honesty. So it's not like he's going to do one thing and he's going to say something else. That's fooling himself. Not fooling anybody else, right? Certainly not God. You're talking about someone who's honest, and his priorities are straight. He has his objective and goal and focus, why he came down to this world, clear, to learn Torah, to do mitzvahs, to serve God with joy and gladness of heart, etc. And he knows that in order to do so, he has to be healthy. He knows that he needs a body and a clear mind in order to serve God. To have a healthy body, you have to eat. So he eats. But when he eats, he knows that it's for a godly sake and purpose, that I'm going to be able to learn Torah or do the mitzvah or do any good deed or a favor to another person. So the focus doesn't begin. This godly purpose doesn't begin when he actually does the mitzvah. It begins when he eats. So may it be a fat piece of meat, but if that is going to make him feel good, in order to do the mitzvah, eating that piece of meat is like bringing a sacrifice on the altar. As the Rabbi said, Chamra v'reicha pikhin, a good wine, v'reicha is good fragrance, sharpens the mind. So good wine means good wine. It's not something spiritual. Good wine is good wine, a good fragrance. But because pikhin, which means it crystallizes the mind, it makes the mind sharp, so when I'm going to learn Torah without it, I won't understand it adequately. Or even I'll understand it, it won't be with that same clarity as I learn after drinking the wine, and similar to eating that fat piece of meat. So when does the mitzvah, when does the kedusha, the holy process begin? Not when I start learning, or not when I understand the Gemara. It's when I ate it for that godly purpose. So here you're looking at a piece of meat. You're looking at the action of someone consuming a good fat piece of meat on its own before you bring in a godly purpose. There's nothing godly about it. And if you don't eat it in a way which is just to, like he's going to say, just to be somebody to give in to the lusts of his body and to overly indulge in food and sink himself into the passion of eating. But even someone who's not that type of person, but just the neutral action, or that simple action, or that innocent action, if you will, of eating that good piece of meat with an ungodly purpose, it's not particularly ungodly. The food is kosher, but there's nothing godly about it. And that's the neutral state. But with this state of neutrality, I could go ahead and go forward. How do I go forward? That I eat it with a godly purpose. So that I eat the godly purpose, that eating itself becomes like I brought a sacrifice onto the altar. And bringing a sacrifice on the altar, it was certainly a holy experience. It's a mitzvah. And if it's a mitzvah, it receives its energy directly from Kedusha. Similarly, when I ate that piece of meat, and I drank that wine, and with that I broadened my mind to understand, to have a perception, a clearer perception in godliness. Two things over here, if you notice. La Hashem l'terase. A clear perception in godliness and a clear perception in Hashem's Torah. So then, the experience of eating the meat was also a godly experience. So where is the energy coming from into that experience? The energy is coming from the world of Kedusha, of complete holiness. And he says the same thing, or in order to fulfill the mitzvah of the ta'anig of Shabbos v'yontif. In other words, the pleasure of Shabbos v'yontif. We know that Shabbos v'yontif, the one eats good food, fat meat, and drinks good wine, and a good meal. That itself is part of the mitzvah of Shabbos and Yontif. You know, I'm sure it is halacha and Shulchan Aruch that eating on Shabbos is a mitzvah, and good food, fat meat, basar, dugim, fish, and drinking wine. So the Alter Rebbe says, when it comes to Shabbos v'yontif, it doesn't even have to be for a godly purpose, that I'm going to later learn Torah or later do a mitzvah, because that itself is a mitzvah to eat basar, v'dugim, v'yayin, drink wine and eat good meat and fish. So that's what he says. Or if it's not Shabbos v'yontif for the godly purpose, or Shabbos v'yontif just to fulfill, and again, there has to be some focus, that I'm not just eating again to get lost in my meal, but for the mitzvah of Einik Shabbos, to bring pleasure into the day of Shabbos via eating. So because it's a mitzvah, then the chai is the energy which is in that meat, which till I ate it with this godly purpose, was associated with klipas nega, with that intermediate force. What I did was nisbarer, I extracted the energy of that meat, or v'hayayin, or that wine, shayinishpa, which till that moment the energy came from klipas nega, from that force of it, from that intermediate force. Va'oila, now it ascends lashem, to God, ka'oila ke'karban, like an oila and karban, because we know that there's the sacrifice. There were different types of sacrifices. There was a sacrifice which was, for example, called the shlomim, that not everything went onto the altar. Part of it the altar ate, in other words, part of it the animal went onto the altar, part of it went to the Kohen, and part of it to the one who brought the sacrifice also was able to enjoy part of the meat. So that's a regular korban, and that itself is a mitzvah. But there's another korban, like the classic korban, which went the sacrifice, which was twice a day, which corresponds to the shachas and the mincha, right? Which is called the korban ola, which again, shachas we daven today, and mincha corresponds to the two daily sacrifices they brought on the altar, which was called the korban tamid. They were a ola. What means ola? That the whole entire animal, obviously besides the skin, but the whole entire animal was brought onto the altar and consumed into the fire, into the godly fire. So the Alter Rebbe says, not only a regular korban, this experience, if you consume a piece of meat for a godly purpose, but ka'oila, it becomes like the most special korban, which was the oila, which was completely consumed into the godly fire. and was the quintessential carbon, because that was a carbon. Again, if you look at the idea, what a carbon means, sacrifice, sacrificing something to Hashem. The Ola was a complete sacrifice, because everything was consumed on the altar, on Hashem's altar. So Sat Apr says, if we eat with a godly purpose, it's not only ki carbon, a regular carbon, but ki Ola, like the most special carbon which existed. So could you imagine that piece of meat, that till the moment I consumed it with a godly purpose, or the experience of eating the piece of meat, even a kosher piece of meat without a godly purpose, it was receiving its energy from klipas neg. Not the lower level of klipa. Again, what you said is kosher, and you're not doing anything. You're not giving. You're not overly indulging, like the Alter Rebbe is going to say, based on this parsha, the idea of zolo v'sove. But it's just this innocent act of eating without a godly purpose. It's receiving energy from klipas nega. But the moment I eat it with a godly purpose, it becomes like the action of a mitzvah, like a sacrifice on the altar, and there's nothing holier than that. Which brings such beautiful perspective to our engaging in worldly affairs, again, with honesty, truly with honesty, because again, that's an integral part of our service to God, is that we have to be honest with our service. But in the same token, it gives such a different perspective. Even we said it's not something totally new, even though Alter Rebbe brings so much life into this notion. It's based on the Rambam. The Rambam says that the 24 hours a day can be completely classified as avodas Hashem, service to God. But this sheds so much light, because this is receiving its energy from klipas nega, and it has a bit of good. So when I extract the good and I expand on the good, so it becomes a complete holy experience, just like I'm doing a mitzvah. Have a great night.